It is now 7:33. And unlike rules, there's no game to get to. Yeah, it was a tough game. Although Patty is still dancing. So
a lot of people are, I guess, going to the Monday meeting.
No, that we have some people that are, I already know that some could not make this Thursday meeting when I made it. And James and Lisa will be, should be showing up a little bit later. Lisa's train is just getting in about now. So, all right. First on the agenda, and we have 4 guests here, is the discussion and take action on the teacher's contract. So can I have somebody move that motion? I'll take Stacy. Do I have a second? Okay, we have a second with Beth. Okay, so let's start the discussion. I'll give you my take on this contract. As I said before, I'm not sure that the 11% that was shown at the state of the town is an accurate number, because this year alone we have 28% at our top tier. They're only getting a 1.5. Next year we will be having 32% at that top tier, again 1.5. And while those sound like high numbers, the reality is compared to the Dergs and some of the other communities around here, the number of teachers that we have at the top tier are not as high as some of our Derg members. It's one of the reasons why during the time that Governor Malloy was talking about moving pensions over, if you were above the state average, Darien was either at the lowest or the next lowest in Derg for the average salary, and a lot of that had to do not with the salary structure, but rather the distribution of our employees. So, so when you look at that, the number is significantly lower. In addition, there's $204,000 that we're currently paying on a stipend that goes away. So as we move teachers, and there were approximately 120 teachers who are on Middlesex and the high school that fall into that category of moving from either 4 to 4.5 to teaching 5 courses. Now, if you recall back when we, on the prior contract 3 years ago, there was a discussion to move into 4.5 at Middlesex Middle School. And the discussion that I had with Dr. Brenner at the time is that it was anticipated by just that move that through attrition there would be 6 positions that would not be filled should somebody leave. And it's an interesting concept here, because essentially what we're doing is telling these teachers that there's 11%, you have to work 11% more, and we're giving you a 3.5% raise, and for those teachers that were already doing it, we're taking money away. In addition, I would suggest that over time, and it would either be in the turnover ratio or as things move on, that there is a number of positions going forward that would also be not filled. So if I'm looking at just that one aspect, and we have 120 people that are told that they have to work 11% more, that could easily equal 10 teachers down the road. And I'm just coming up with a rough number. It's not confirmed and other things. It's just back of the envelope. And if you add on that our average teacher makes about $85,000 and has $15,000 of benefits, 10 teachers is $1 million of savings. In addition, if you look at the enrollment that's going on, if the enrollment in the Middlesex and the high school tend to go down from where it is, that might also provide opportunities to the Board of Ed down the road. In addition, one of the important things is that Darien-Ann's teachers have for some time, more than this contract and the one prior, pay 21% of their health care costs. That's significantly more than the library or town employees do. In addition, if you go, the only one that pays more, by the way, happens to be Ridgefield. They're going to be about 22, 23, but this whole movement there was initially started by a mediation by Ridgefield that moved to the HSA type of accounts, and then everybody else fell in line. But even our neighbor New Canaan will not get to that 21% until 2 years from now. Their contract's a year ahead of us. But when you look at their deductible, their individual deductible was $2,250 and $4,500 as a family, while ours is $2,500 and $5,000. Now, we all heard the story about what's going on in the healthcare. So if the healthcare is just budgeted for an 8%, we can anticipate that while that some of our teachers are getting a 3%, that their healthcare costs are also going up by that similar amount. So that cuts in a little bit into their salary increase. There are several other aspects of this contract that were discussed by Dr. Adley. Part of our give back is a carry forward on a personal day. And one thing that I've already expressed before, that because my son took advantage of it in corporate, and I think it's a very modern approach, is that the parental leave for the non-birthing parent or for the adoption is a very good aspect to have put into the contract. I think it's family oriented. I think it shows that we're a good employer, and I know from my son's own experience when my grandson came that it was very beneficial to his family. So, and including adoption, I think is also pretty good. Other than that, the coaches are getting a 2% stipend, as are some of the other leaders. And reading the contract, you can see the various classifications and how they move through the years and the grades, and that I believe that the last packet that came out from Nadine, which I believe I passed to you, between pages 8 and 32, although it absolutely killed my printer several times when I tried to print it, and then speaking of Beth, it was killing hers also. So, but the salary ranges and the number of employees on each of that was included in that packet. So that was one of the questions we asked. It is there. Other than that, is there anything else that anyone wants to add to the to what we have? Oh, I forgot one of them. One of them is there was a change in tutoring, so that in the past somebody could tutor a student and they could be tutoring the student that they're going to have the next year. And so that capability was eliminated. All the other things, seem to be consistent with the prior contract. If we didn't have a red line version, which we had in the past, so made it easy for, it's reading contracts for dummies. So you don't need to go and compare one to the other, which none of us really want to do. But for the other things seem to be pretty consistent. So if there's any questions on the contract, I would direct them over there.
No, I just want you, Jack, to talk to us about the process. the RTM will have to approve the
Yes, good
contract, and even if it doesn't, it becomes law automatically, right?
That, yes, I'm sorry, that's usually my...
It's your go-to.
Yeah, my go-to that I start every one of these things. We are not going to be approving the contract. We are voting not to disapprove the contract. And if we don't act within, I believe it's 30 days after it's been filed with the town clerk, the union contract takes effect automatically. That one time happened at the RTM based upon a snowstorm and an RTM rule that said we had to meet the following Monday instead of meeting the next Tuesday when the snow was gone, or at least off the streets. So that rule has changed, but yes, we are voting not to disagree with the contract. We are not voting to approve.
Not reject.
Yeah, any way you want to put it. I have standard verbiage that I take off of F&B's report on union contracts that I read.
I have a question now. I'm not sure if I understood you correctly, but our benefit payouts to teachers is at the lower end in terms of pensions relative to our, what I'll call competitors. I think you call them peer group.
Well, no, the pensions are based, when you look at what our average salary was and what the formula that Governor Malloy has, which based upon what you were over the average salary for the entire state, regardless of the fact that it costs more to be here than the rest of the state. We were at the low end, so we were at a smaller percentage over the average salary than our tier members. Now, we don't pay for the pension for our teachers. The state does. So the pension...
now.
I only can speak in the present. But the pension that we saw in the budget is that not all of the pensions are state. So let me just clarify that again. We constantly refer to this as the teacher's contract. It's not just teachers. It is all certified staff. So our school psychologists, if you're a social worker and you're certified, they are all included in this union contract. The exception of certified staff to be included in this is the administrators have their own union. And that, if I'm not mistaken, usually follows the year after we get done with the certified staff contract. Yeah, I mean, I really would prefer it to be called the certified staff because it's more descriptive of what it is.
So my question is, based on what we know on the makeup of the teachers, is will we over time gravitate towards the mean of these salaries, or is there something unique to Darien which will always be at the lower end of that?
So it's based on turnover. Darien has experienced a fair amount of turnover, so it's hard to say. It's why you see some districts whose teachers are mostly at the top report we have a 1.5% increase. What they're really talking about is their GWI, not their step. It's typical in education I'm going to digress a little bit, to report step and GWI. So that's where you see we have our step in here, and then at the top we have our GWI versus municipal contracts, which don't report step. They only report GWI. So the overall your question is, it's hard to tell. It's based on teacher turnover.
Both here and then versus
but
our
let me
right?
add something, because we sort of mentioned this at the Saturday marathon. There's different reasons for turnover that have existed in this district. Sometimes it's you're bringing in new administrators. Sometimes it's teachers did not want to participate in the curriculum the administration desired, part of the reasons why department chairs were implemented, or they don't feel comfortable with a one-to-one initiative, or simply that our own staff review indicates that we're not comfortable giving this individual a 10-year position. So those could ebb and flow. I would expect that during certain times of changes in administration, we would see higher. I do recall having a conversation with Dr. Brenner, must be about 2-3 years ago, and if you recall, there was a significant number of turnover throughout the district. And speaking to Dr. Brenner, he said to me that there were really only about 5 teachers that he was really sorry to see leave.
Okay.
So, sorry. He may not
No,
like
that
I
was
said
thank
that,
you.
but I've already gotten in trouble today, so I might as well
I
just
was
keep
gonna say,
going.
John.
I just have a question. Having talked about turnover, how do we compare as a district to the other district in comparison to relative to turnover? Is our turnover less, high?
Our turnover's been relatively high
Mhm.
of late, and again, I think Jack's probably right on some of those factors, and then some of those are unpredictable. You might attract a younger staff, and then they decide to move further away, or get married, or have children, or a job takes away.
Or spouse
Turnovers-
leaves,
Turnover's one of
spouse
those.
moves.
Yeah, I mean, Rich, you could speak to it a little bit, but every year we try and predict it, but it's a predictor.
I'm just going to add with a parent hat on for a second that parents often hear from teachers that they are leaving for a better contract and closer to home. Those are the top two reasons that I hear from staff when they
Well,
leave.
I don't know about better contract because they're all relatively the same in certain regards of what they're getting, but the closer to home is a very fair statement, especially for certain experienced teachers. And it was actually going back to the Malloy pension discussion. It actually created some angst to some of the more experienced teachers because while nobody would ever say this, but I would imagine that certain districts would not be hiring an experienced teacher if they were paying a more expensive part of the pension plan to it. And so even though that's against the law, and I will state that we know it's against the law and we wouldn't do that, I can't imagine that certain other districts might not consider that. So the interesting thing about how the teacher's pension works in this state is because it's pooled up in Hartford, that it doesn't matter, the teacher can work a number of years in Norwalk, work here, work up in Avon, they're all part of that same pool. So their pension travels with them.
I support the teacher's contract, but I just want to be clear on one thing. On the $5,000 deductible and the $2,500 deductible, the board does contribute 50% of that deductible, do they not? They do.
That's pretty scary.
Wait, I'm waiting. I'm old and I'm deaf. So do you mind?
So I'm saying
Thank you.
on the deductible, the board does contribute 50% of the deductible.
Right.
So
Which is pretty standard language
Yeah,
around.
I mean, I have no problem with it, but it's not really a 5,000 deductible. It's a 2,500 and a 1,250.
I do have a question, and this is only to show that I read the appendix.
So glad you did.
Yeah, thank you. On the last page, 46, and so we were talking about the memorandum of agreement where the teacher's experience, and do you mind pointing this down? It appeared that based upon the years of experience, they were moving to grade 4, and then there was a shift in what was going on in grade 5. That's actually increasing some of the starting salaries for some of our less experienced teachers. Is that the purpose on that?
Yes, because what we found, and Marge can add to this a little bit, we've been very successful negotiators, and we've had a lot of steps, but what we were finding is it was actually very hard to attract young talent because we were starting on such a low starting salary. And, I mean, Marge, you can speak to it, but in the hiring process, we were really finding our surrounding neighbors were picking up a lot of our teachers because of the way our step grid was organized. And teachers who had taught for 3 years weren't getting credit for those 3 years. I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's exactly right, and that little table there moves the cohort through the salary grid so new teachers don't jump ahead of teachers who are already here, but we were less competitive at the bottom step because teachers with 0, 1, and 2 years experience all ended up at the first step.
Okay,
So you could go to another district and have 2 years teaching experience and be further along on the salary grid.
So does this make us more competitive with getting younger teachers? Now, does that deal for all teachers? Because all years of experienced teachers, because some have a BA, but we tend to hire more that are going in the masters. Is that a true statement, or can you expand on what my general statement was, please?
We do try to hire people at least with masters or higher, so we're not as competitive on the bachelor's column, but the state also incentivizes, give teachers a deadline for how long they have before they need to get a master's or they can't be certified. So we're okay that column is not quite as high.
I didn't know that.
See, we taught Jack something new.
How long is it? 10 years.
Are there any other questions?
Is it public information how the teachers voted on the contract, what their numbers were?
No.
Okay.
I will say that, but I think it's fair to say that it was a long, hard-fought negotiation, which is probably a sign of a good negotiation, and that, like, no one left. Everyone felt like they compromised. And I will say getting the teachers to that 5 was a difficult task at times, and you can understand why. There are teachers who felt that they gave significantly. We felt it was educationally appropriate and fiscally responsible and kind of in keeping with the profession at this point. But I will say that the teachers, both parties here heard each other. There were contentious moments, there were good moments, but I think the town should be very proud of this contract. I think that it's a good contract. I think some of the headline numbers that were thrown out, I'm glad we're able to discuss it and explain it because they seem, that's exactly what they are, headline numbers, until you break it down and understand what they are. But I think this supports our teachers and really is very fiscally responsible for the town.
Now, I want to add something else because you can't count on it, but for somebody who's been doing school budgets for quite a number of years, I actually figured out by going onto LinkedIn of when I actually started here. The fact is that even with a 3.4% teacher contract raise, last year I believe it was like about 3.234 for the current year, for the prior year. It was 3.234. When you look at what the increase is on teacher salaries, we were down around 2.7. Now, part of that is nothing more than the turnover, because when the Board of Ed is budgeting for their salaries, in the same way that the Board of Selectmen would be budgeting for salaries in regard, is unless you know somebody is leaving, you have to budget that your current staff moving to their next step to calculate out what the salaries are going to be. and then it's the turnover ratio that ends up being where you estimate what your amounts were. And I believe this year, if I recall, Rich, you mentioned that there were 24 teachers. And on that, even though this gets a little bit into the budget, but I thought that number was up from the prior year.
It is. So the current year is about $400,000.
Yes.
Next year it's a little over $500,000.
And can you explain why that increase?
So there's ebbs and flows depending on how many people turn over every year. We did assume 24 individuals at certain points in the master's column, but because of the workload changes, we're also assuming 2 secondary positions will not be filled, that those individuals will be leaving, and that coursework would be absorbed through attrition at the secondary level due to the 4.5 to 5 change.
Okay, that was actually the answer. That's the number I was looking for.
So teacher's contract should be looked at the maximum financial liability
Right.
that we are agreeing we will incur. But yes, in any large employee group, we would expect fluctuations.
So,
But this is the maximum liability.
are there any other questions, comments? Is the committee ready to vote?
Mhm.
All those in favor of the teaching? No, we already motions. I did that to discuss this only because we have guests here. Otherwise, I would have waited to the end. Is there, all in favor? It looks like it's unanimous. I'm sorry, I was looking over that because I ended up with the, with hearing the heartbeat of my one on the way to the, so.
Voted to not reject.
We voted to
Not to reject.
Yes.
So, thank you very much. Everybody's welcome to stay as we discuss what we're going to be saying to you.
We would want to ruin the surprise.
We could actually discuss it now.
Jack, had you told me, I would have been more than happy. But then Claire would be all alone on Tuesday. All right. Well, we look forward to it, and thank you all.
Thank you for
Thanks for
coming.
your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me just say, Dr. Ali, sorry, couldn't be here. He's actually out at a professional conference, or else he'd be here. Claire will be with you guys next week.
Yes, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but I thought that with the staff that they were bringing, we were in pretty good hands. So, and we've already discussed this contract, so. Next. Okay. So. Next on the agenda is the comments that will be done by Peter and Beth to the Board of Ed. We're going to vote on this. I want to make sure that the comments have the full strength of the committee. So I'm opening up the floor to any comments, concerns, issues. I think that they did a wonderful job writing this.
Did you see the place I said?
I did, and
There's a word missing or two
yes,
words.
there is. I saw that, and I thank you very much for flagging that. I put in.
It said to further assure in the middle of the page, we understand the rationale supporting the proposed tech budget. We request information and then scheduled devices budgeted compared to. I think you want the number of.
It was related to
Relating
schedule.
to schedule.
Yeah,
Okay.
relating to.
Something was missing.
Yes. I missed the last line of Mike's comment somehow.
So again, to the process, we're gonna get together next Monday, the 21st.
No,
When is it? The 20?
22nd.
the 22nd,
Yes.
Tuesday.
and
That was like
Tuesday the 22nd,
Yes, Tuesday the
And
22nd.
then
I haven't
meeting-
gotten my days right lately.
Tuesday the 21st
First,
is at,
right.
yes,
Oh.
Tuesday the
Yeah.
21st
21st.
at the Board of Ed.
okay, at the Board of Ed, with the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance.
No,
The
they,
Board of
they already
Finance,
did theirs.
They've done theirs.
they did theirs,
That's what they
last
sent out.
Tuesday. I do expect, only because Jim and,
Taylor.
Taylor seem to be the Board of Ed assignees to, as I said, the Board of Ed, that one or both will be there.
He said this out.
No, that's different. That
That's-
is
That's not their
completely
speech,
different.
that's different.
That's
We're
not
not
their
talking about that
speech,
tonight.
and we're not gonna be discussing that.
I just had a question on where, so, it doesn't have to do with an edit to the speech, but overall, the Board of Finance guidance on the 3% number, I just was curious, I'm sure that number comes from somewhere, but I just would like a little more clarity, Jack, if you know, where that number comes from, because there's not a lot of explanation as to why the Board of Finance chose 3% this year. And if you don't know, then we can ask them, but
3% has been a consistent number in which the Board of Finance has been looking to not go over. But I'm going to really kick the can a little bit over to Martha and ask if she might have any insights on guidance and where it is.
No, not in the Board of Finance, no. But, I
In
mean,
the past,
pardon me?
in the past, I know guidance was given.
Oh, yeah,
But-
actually,
but-
when we had the economic downturn, I remember having a meeting and saying, you absolutely cannot increase it beyond 2%. And they lived up to that.
No, I do recall that. That's why I want to say, so it's based upon the economics, it's based upon the fact that we do know that there's some contractual commitments that we have. Turnover is not as prevalent on the town side. So, and not that they have expensive contracts, at least they're not at 3% by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it's based upon the economics of not wanting to have more than a 3% increase in our mill rate. So if you keep the boards and they're operating at 3% or under, and the capital, the Board of Finance then has some luxury of determining whether or not they want to bond something, or based upon the general fund policy that they did of where the range should be, whether or not we're moving funds from the general fund to help pay down, we can manage to keep the mill rate at a reasonable rate. The other thing to add, and last year, every time we do a revow, it's sort of like a zero, you're starting at zero.
Yeah.
But, just roughly, you've got to remember, we have an $8.4 billion portfolio here. So even if the grand list moves by 0.5%, that could generate as much as $700 to $1 million of incremental revenue just by keeping the same mill rate. So that covers some of the inflation costs and other things that are existent in the town as a whole. So, there's those various moving parts that are there. So, and typically we find the new grand list, and it's not that people revalue homes, it's work has been done, or new capital has been put in, or leaseholds, or other things like that, or new cars are bought and other things along those lines. But usually the new grand list is announced, I believe, the 31st of January. So,
Giving housing values, it hasn't gone down?
No, it doesn't go down.
Ever.
Well, only after it can go down when you do a reval, all right? But the fluctuation in the housing market between now and the next reval doesn't have any effect on our grand list. The only thing that will affect our grand list happens to be new construction or new leaseholds and that. There may be a nuance, and I'm not sure about it, but you know, currently, if you imagine we have 3 projects that are going to be moving along, and some of those buildings had leaseholds. Well, the leaseholds aren't there anymore, so that may result in actually something going down, but that's like a removal of something. So, but other than that, if your house is worth $1 million today and tomorrow it's worth $900,000 and the next year it's worth $1.2 million, no effect on our grand list until the next reval happens.
Yes, but the grand list remained by and large in the aggregate the same, but there was a shift within the larger properties which are assessed lower, and the smaller properties which were assessed higher, which makes us all sensitive to how much really is palatable for the people of Darien to increase the budget at these times. And that's, I think, listening to the people we do listen to, that's our job. I don't think it's an issue that the Board of Finance sets a limit. And I don't think it should be an issue where they set it this year, because where inflation is, where other towns are going, I think 3% is a very reasonable number.
I would be more upset if they didn't set guidelines.
Okay, so that's where we start at.
I don't have a problem with their number. I just wanted to understand the process in picking the number, because there's not a lot of transparency and explanation. It's just 3% is your number, and there's nothing behind it. And so I think it's important that people understand where that number comes from.
Yes, it's nice to know it wasn't just the result of like somebody throwing a dart.
Exactly.
Well, I highly doubt it.
They looked at the general
They may have
financial
thrown 2
conditions,
darts.
and they looked at the teacher contract, and
I'm sure they did. I'm not saying they didn't. But I've heard from constituents that they don't understand where that number came from. So I think it's important for the Board of Finance to be a little more transparent in how they come up with that number.
Well,
The people you talked to, did they think it was too high or too low?
They just didn't understand where it came from.
Okay. Yeah, I think then we should.
what we can do is when we will have John during our budget times, and we can ask John to give a further explanation on this.
And Jack, that leads me to one maybe minor comment, maybe not minor, depending on how you come off on it. There's a language here to talk about this very issue. It says that in addition, not much of this increase is discretionary. That being said, such increases are not sustainable going forward, especially due to this shift of the tax burden. I mean, are we prepared to draw that line in the sand, saying that that number will not be acceptable next year? And I don't think we've ever done that before. And so I was wondering if we could take that not to maybe likely not be sustainable, or we look forward to the board's efforts to bring that number down, or something that's less, less
I can only
dogmatic.
speak from my own opinion. I don't mind being a little dogmatic here. The town cannot sustain 3.5 increases in a Board of Ed going forward, because, quite frankly, there's 2 aspects to it. First of all, it's the largest budget, so it pales the Board of Selectmen budget significantly. And I was just having a conversation today. We have over the last couple of years mentioned that with the exception of maybe one park and rec person and the civilian dispatch, the town has basically kept its workforce at a steady level and has looked for efficiencies in what they're doing. But if they have to make significant reductions in their budget, it's coming down to what services we're not going to be providing. And so I think it was sort of mentioned, and also thinking that my comment is that I believe that Dr. Adley, and maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, or at least state it publicly, but I've been getting into so much trouble anyhow, it doesn't matter. I think he took some low-hanging fruit. Things that he could come in here and say, based upon my prior experience, these are things that I think we can move. That's part of the reason we say we're looking forward to how he does. But he set some guidelines here. He said, I'm not changing any programs that have been promised. Now, that doesn't mean if you looked at that deferral list, all right, and not everything was ready for prime time, nor was necessarily everything that was on there approved or potentially ever going to be approved. It was what the requests were that he thought he should identify. But there was $1 million just there. And if you're implementing that $1 million, there may start to come a time where Dr. Adley's going to, and the board are going to have to wrestle with what existing programs they're currently offering that they may not. And, you know, I'm not going to propose what that might be, but, you know, there's what has already been discussed, sophomore football. What they discussed is whether or not they can continue the IDEA program in 9th grade. You know, there's other things that are going on there. If you're going to start teaching more than the languages that we're doing now, which there's always a conversation about, then what are you going to reduce to keep the budget in a reasonable manner? I mean, so.
Well, I sent a note just before this meeting saying that I would not take budget control off the table myself. I mean, if you don't want to affect program, we haven't touched budget control for 4 years. It's been budgeted at about 250, which is, what is that, 0.25 roughly mill rate. Especially, I think the Board of Ed should try to work out some sort of an agreement with the Board of Finance. I mean, I'm okay with leaving in half of the amount. That's 2 teachers. And if a third one is needed, you know, there's an agreement that the Board of Ed will be held harmless and the Board of Finance will automatically fund it. But I mean, that's a way of reducing without affecting program.
But,
and we haven't used it for 4 years.
But that, we actually have.
We have used it. No,
Yeah.
I looked. I mean, that report that was just issued by the Board of Finance, it hasn't been used.
No, that's
They
not,
used it.
and they used it. That's, what
They
they
didn't
were
use it.
saying is this is the starting point of where funds are coming from. And I'm going to talk about that because
Well, I guess I didn't understand.
I would have expected, it's typically zeroed out at the end of the year. So I would expect that, I was a little disappointed, and I don't want to talk about the Board of Finance memorandum because right now that's between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed, but it's not sources of cash. And I misspoke when I said there's pockets of money. There aren't pockets of money. You know, if I'm looking at the Board of Selectmen side, if they have $30 million in their budget, even if the revenues come in more, they're not spending more than their $30 million. That expense. So what I'm saying is, when I look at the total town, the town may end up with more money in one income category or the other, or may collect more taxes than what it is, and I just included that all in the Board of Selectmen. But no, that zeroes out, that, I mean, that, they allocate that and move that to, other areas. That's number one. Number
Well,
two.
can I ask you, I mean, help me understand this budget control. I mean, in 16-17, the original budget was 279,000. Actual spending was nothing, you know. There was 279 left in that budget. I mean, 17-18, the same thing. It says 274 and none was spent. I mean, am I reading this wrong?
I think we might, but it's worthwhile to follow up
the
on.
same thing in 18-19, and I looked on the most recent financial report in October, and it was still in there, so.
I know we didn't use budget control this school year. I remember that conversation. But I know
the school year we're in now, 1920.
Yeah, the one we're in now, this current one, we didn't use the budget control, but in years prior, we definitely had
then these numbers are wrong.
to break a section.
They may be, but
Okay.
let me go back to something else. If they were to set up a category for the equivalent amount of what you're talking about in budget control, it would still be in our budget this year because it would require a reserve account for budget control to be in the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance's budget, which ends up being moving the funds from Peter, which is the Board of Ed's money, to overall the Board of Selectmen's budget, because the Board of Finance really doesn't have their own budget. It's included in the Board of Selectmen budget. That's number one. But number two, unless it was coming out of reserve account, all right, similar to there's $100,000 still in the special ed reserve account for the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance does not have the authority to give them that money without it coming back to the RTM.
No.
So,
Well, if they haven't, I can't remember the rules, if they have it in contingency.
if they have it in a reserve account, then they can do that transfer. So, like, if they ever wanted to move the $100,000 out of special ed to do that, they can do that.
Right.
But anything else, since it's changing their appropriation of what they're going, and we gave them the appropriation, it has to return to the RTM.
Well, even if it did,
Well,
do you
but
think
let's
the
think
RTM
about-
is gonna turn it down?
Yeah, maybe. I think it would. I
Plus,
think.
if you look at current budget.
Wait, let me just finish. We have $100 million budget here. And if somebody's coming back for $150,000 out of $100 million budget, there's going to be a lot of discussion on that floor of the RTM. Number one, why you couldn't find it, and other things like that. I feel more comfortable with having that money go, and if it's not used and returned to the town, all right, at the end and goes into the general fund, then, and the Board of Finance then in their discretion uses it to reduce the taxes of the next year, that way we're reducing the taxes from there. But to come back for $100,000 to the RTM, when you have a $100 million budget, just doesn't sit well, and it's just psychologically a bad move to make.
I don't know, I'm trying to think of a way to take some money, if people want to move towards the 3% where it doesn't affect the program. And I mean, again, it's 4, they're making the worst case assumption, which.
Well, we have 4 sections that are within.
No, I know why.
That they list right here.
But I mean, that's
And-
always the argument
And
every year.
but over break, we got 10 new kids in the district,
Yeah.
just in elementary school, and we have class sizes that are already above optimal, that had we had that enrollment in the fall, those would have been broken sections.
I mean,
It is something that I anticipate they would be discussing.
The Board of Ed did ask on Tuesday night for an updated enrollment.
Right, but it's not just the updated enrollment. The fact of the matter is that's something that they're going to have to discuss on themselves of whether or not they're willing to move it. I believe that some people are. We put it here with some people, but if there's a disagreement on that one point, we can discuss whether or not the committee feels how we should do that.
I'm with Martha on this one. First of all, I always have a problem with the word budget control, because if you don't really speak the language that we're speaking, you think somebody's going to tighten the screws when money is being spent that have not provided for in the budget. That it isn't. It is what in a business budget is called contingency. So you set aside some amount of contingency. Now I'm coming to the point where Martha is, because we haven't ever used any, or as long as I can look back, have ever used any contingencies, because in the end, the Board of Education budget ended up with a surplus. And so did the town, by the way, and a larger one. So I can see how you go and say, given the history of these misses, where we do find out structurally we plan for more than we actually will end up spending, we dispense with this, keep it tight, see what happens, and have a few $100,000 that will bring that 3.46 closer to the 3% that we're aiming at in the first place. That's what I want.
At our last meeting, you said you preferred that they had a surplus to return to town. You actually said that you felt that that was right, that you said if they came in right at, you said that there's some funny business going on, and we all chuckled.
Yes, okay. When, after they do the transfers.
Well, Matt is.
That's what I meant. When they do the transfers, at that time, I'm not talking about the transfers right now, but when they do the transfers, they can move things around that we don't even know what they are sometimes, or know after the fact. I'm not talking about the transfers. I'm talking about the budget.
Okay,
That's it.
I do want to make something, and Deb would appreciate this. First of all, in Board of Ed accounting, if I'm moving something from Middlesex salary to the high school salary, that is not a transfer. That is a reclassification or an adjustment within budget, because as we discussed before, there's about 10 or 11 categories for, unless it's going between categories, that is a transfer. That is approved. It's presented in the Finance Committee. It is fully discussed and approved in the Finance Committee, and then again at the Board of Ed. So there's nothing hidden on what's going on. If it's reclassifications, a memorandum is provided to the Board of Ed, but Board of Eds do not vote on that. That's totally within the discretion of the administration to move within the same category. Now, I'm going to add something else. These numbers are placeholders. That's all they've ever been.
Yep.
So it's how we devise the budget, but we do not have, nor does the Board of Finance have, line item veto. That's different than the Board of Selectmen budget, where in fact we specifically have line item veto. So if you don't like that they ordered 5 magazines at $100 each, we can cut $100 out of their budget. If the school is ordering the same 5 magazines for $100 and we cut $100 out, they could still buy those 5 magazines and take the $100 from someplace else. That we will be approving a total appropriation, and that's a very big difference in budgeting and even how the two different boards budget.
Yes, but Jack, that animal raises its head when you say we should be at 3%, and you don't want to be micromanaged. But then the thing comes in at 346. What else can you do but micromanage to bring it down? The reason you set a limit is because you want to say, guys, you know better how to do this. You know the details of your business much better. The Board of Education and the district know much better than the Board of Finance or us how to do this. So you guys structure it in a way with a target of 3%. once it comes back at 3.46, now you're gonna start micromanagers. All I have heard is line items,
But
since we started this process.
But I'm going to say something surprised, and actually spoke to Mike during the meeting. John Zabrowski, Board of Finance, went and presented the Board of Finance comments. Mike, what was your interpretation of what John said in regard to the 3.46?
He was gonna work with the Board of Ed.
He said he understood, based upon two things that were not in the control of the Board of Ed, of why they were over the 3%. If you take away the healthcare, if you take away that, they were actually under 3% at 2.9. In addition, they're also down on capital, and they may be able to, depending upon how the Board of Finance wishes to pay for things, bring the total increase down.
And he's cutting 7.89 FTEs.
Yeah. And you know, he still hasn't heard, because we haven't gone through it. We haven't gone through what the proposed cuts are that will be coming from the Board of Ed. And so, you know, it may include budget control, because that went up this year. It may include increasing the number of the turnover. It may be reducing some other programs that are going on there. But, you know, let's see where it comes out at.
My comment would be, I just would not mention budget control. I'd completely take it out of there, because if the Board of Ed is going to, on their own, debate the level of budget control, why in advance take it off the table?
I have no problem. Is everybody in favor of taking that one line out?
Yeah.
Okay. How?
Can I make one quick comment?
Sure. You can make a long one.
Thanks. It feels like the relationship with the Board of Finance, Board of Ed, should be, you have a 3% target increase, but in years past, you've usually reduced your actual spend relative to the budget by anywhere from 0.5 to 1. So we haven't felt the need to micromanage that. So once you start failing to do that, so not hitting your full amounts, then do we have to start micromanaging?
We don't micromanage.
We can't.
Let me explain something.
No, but I'm saying...
No. The Board of Finance, at their discretion, can cut anything they wanted. So, rather than micromanaging, all right, and in fact, Kate and I have had this conversation as well, if for some reason, and this happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, this committee proposed to do a blanket cut on the Board of Selectmen budget. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And we were told by legal counsel that that wasn't acceptable, and there was a whole debate whether or not the things were going there. But in really talking to Kate, should that ever occur again, I would hope that it doesn't ever occur again, that, definitely from the floor of the RTM, mind you, that I think that it would be better to say, Kate, Jamie, we think your budget's $100,000 too much. We're cutting the $100,000. You guys go and tell us where you're finding it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. The same thing.
And that's my message.
The Board of Finance, number one. I mean, I'm not talking about things, but you know, I don't know what their individual expertise are, whether or not it's in healthcare, whether or not it's in education, whether or not it's in bonding or other things like that, or whether or not they don't have any educational knowledge or not. If they feel that this budget is too high, then it's fully within their right and their authority to do a blanket cut to the budget. They cannot go and micromanage or say, we don't want you to buy 50 computers. They can say, we're cutting $50,000, all right? And if the administration and the Board of Ed want to still buy those 50 computers, they are legally authorized to do that. Again, we are only giving a full appropriation. Everything else is placeholders that allow us to have some conversation about it and what's going on. But the Board of Finance has the right to ask for additional detail, as we will be asking for, to have a better understanding, because we also have that right to do the same thing to the Board of Ed. If we feel that the Board of Ed is too high, then we have the right as a committee to make a recommendation, to vote, make a recommendation, and bring to the full RTM. Again, we might have to rationalize why we think it, but again, we can't micromanage them. I was one time...
So we're just giving them our opinion on what we think about their budget. And then our general feelings. That's really what we're doing.
It's not the federal government sometimes.
Right.
You say if it's not this or that, it's dead on arrival. You've heard that before, right?
Yeah.
So this is different. I think this is wonderful in town government that people having these conversations.
Yeah.
Because it really does go to the meat of everything. Ultimately, it is not difficult to have no increase in a Board of Education budget, but then you have to cut all kinds of services. That's where it comes down to. Do you have the tennis court? That's $500,000.
Yep.
Is that going to be out of the capital? Is that going to be bonded? Yeah. How is this going to be done? Maybe next year, because in tennis, every set you move people around. So if he has a little trouble on the tennis court because it hasn't been fixed, both sides have to deal with it eventually. So these are the discussions we have.
Sounds like a psalm.
And the question of which was raised, whether or not we have 5 courts or 7 courts, so that we could host certain tournaments, and whether or not there's an advantage to play on your court, which I'm sure there is. Based upon how I play tennis, there's no advantage on any court.
I'm already better.
Yeah. So, but there's, because where the dead spots are, basically. But the fact of the matter is that will be a decision. We do have line item capability on capital. So if somebody doesn't like new clocks in Hinley, then we can vote down clocks in Hinley. Now, our committee has in fact taken certain actions. When the cafeteria first came, and the initial estimate was $1 million, and we took the tour of the schools, which we highly recommend to everyone, and we heard the numbers. What happened was that Deb Ritchie and I looked at each other, we talked, we went over to Dennis Maroney, and interestingly enough, 2 of them are now on the Board of Ed, and then the 3 of us went over to John Zabrowski and said, we're not confident in these numbers. Are you willing to possibly give them, I think it was like $150,000, to better estimate what the cost of this cafeteria would be? And I'm happy we did, because I believe we came in at 1.6, and the original estimate was $1 million. So, we were able to do that. Deb Ritchie raised the point on 35 Leroy because they were going to put a slate roof up there. And we said, hey, can't you do asphalt? And Brenner happened to be in the meeting with us and said, yeah, I don't care what's on the roof. And that saved the town $150,000. So we will actually go around on the Board of Ed capital and have Lynch here and hopefully Adley as well, and I think John usually attends that. And while we don't vote on it before the Board of Finance does, we will take a sense of the meeting. There were challenges to that shed that was going on. Who proved right at the end, that was Bert. There was two of us who had some concerns about the generator in the, that's now at Town Hall, or being built at Town Hall. But at the end of the day, while we expressed our concerns, neither one of us were willing to go and suggest a cut. And so therefore, the sense of the meeting was, is okay, it stays, but we did express our concern about it. So we'll have that detail on capital where we can do a little micromanaging, but on the rest of it,
It's a number.
yeah, it's a number.
Okay.
And what surprised me was I was actually expecting, I actually walked outside to speak to John because I was expecting him to say, we said 3%, get to 3%. And John didn't say that. And I spoke to John, and after speaking to John, I still checked with Mike and said, did you hear what I heard? And part of it is that there's, the 3.4% increase in their budget, that's pension. They have no say on that. So that'll, and that's also going to affect the town, and that's also going to affect the library. So if I take the 3.4 away, they're already down to 3.12. So hopefully they can come up with another couple of things that get them closer to that amount, where we can at least rationalize that what's going on. Still at risk is this healthcare.
Right.
I mean, they're putting in, now, if you read the contract says that they're allowed to change providers. They have to give notification to the union, but they also have to provide the services equal to, if not better, than the existing carrier has. So.
Well, I mean, the people want to say, I'm perfectly fine with saying something to the effect that, 3.46 is too high. We understand, the pressures you're under. We'll sincerely hope that you'll reduce it. I don't necessarily feel the need to make them turn out all sorts of information to me. In the end, it's their decision on what
I would agree
they
with
want to do.
Jack, that's the reason why when we started, that's the reason why I made that comment.
Yeah, we're coming back. It was quite an excursion, but we can.
Because of we talked about John Zagrodsky's willingness to work and try to find a way to get that number down. That's the reason why I thought that just that hard statement was more appropriately to say we don't want that, but maybe so something comes up next year, we're in the same boat with non-discretionary.
Well, my concern.
It's not that big a deal.
No, well, I don't mind saying that this isn't sustainable, and the other reason I'm saying is that I believe they were at 1.6 million in their capital last year. They're down to 1.3 this year. So that's a $300,000.
They are, but there is
a lot of it's
lot
bonded.
Looming in the future. New school and replacing portables, so it's a good thing.
I'm not even worried about. I'm not even talking about the replacement of the portables, and I'm not even talking about the replacement of the school. They appear to have a HVAC replacement that has some substantial money associated with it.
Yeah.
That moves that needle far up next year. So another $3 million. If I'm not mistaken, it's a $4 million.
It's roughly $4 million.
So that's if they do another 3%, and then we end up with another $4 million in capital, regardless whether or not it is bonded or not, because we still have to pay back that bond.
It's not free money.
Right, it's not like it disappears.
And interest along the way.
Yes, and interest, even though we get favorable interest. The fact is that those numbers are looming out there.
Yep.
So I have no problem saying that that's not sustainable. I also think it's always better to be tougher and then negotiate.
Yeah, I agree.
So, any other comments on the, so we're keeping that?
That's fine.
Okay.
I just want to bring up a discussion.
No, I'm glad, that's what we're here to do. So, are there any other comments on the document itself?
The only other thing I sent was that I really would hope that they understand that those one-page information sheets on the capital requests
Oh, yeah, you would.
are not
emphasize
supplementary,
it.
they're mandatory, sort of. I don't know what the right words are, but
I actually thought your wording, which, of course, for some reason I did not put it in the document, I thought was quite good.
I just,
Continue to practice.
yeah, I
I've already-
strongly suggest that you continue.
No, yeah, well, yes, if they choose not to, then I'll tell them what the consequences are.
Yeah, because we don't have any clue otherwise what they're doing.
Well, I've already discussed this with Tara, and we do have, gotta remember,
Martha sheets.
well,
They're always called Martha sheets.
by the way, there used to be a Mark Thorne commentary on how we presented the budget in the newspaper as well, that he always said from F&B, and when he was on the board of selectmen, I said, well, Mark, now that you're on the board of selectmen, is it still the Mark Thorne commentary? So, but I've already spoken to Tara about that, and she will be speaking to Rich about it. But those sheets are always good because they provide a handout necessarily to the members of the RTM who don't necessarily have the same information of what goes on. So that's good. I had a couple of minor wordsmithing changes.
Oh, okay.
I'll go through them. On the bottom paragraph, first page, fourth line from the bottom, where we know that some,
Right.
we believe that some flexibility, and we've taken out
We've taken out the next sentence.
so that doesn't matter.
Okay.
So on the second page, I one, two, three, four. Fourth bullet down.
To further assure.
Yeah, to further assure our understanding rationale supporting post-tech, we're requesting scheduled devices budget compared to projected enrollment. I'd like to be a little higher level on that. Here's my thought process and my concern. And in fact, I was talking about that today with somebody else outside of the Board of Ed. 5 years ago, we purchased a lot of machines. So I understand that the life expectancy of these, not being held by either one of my boys, because they wouldn't have lasted 5 years, is 5 years. But if we go out and purchase the same amount now, or an equivalent amount now, in another 4 to 5 years, we're going to be in the same boat.
Yeah.
And so what really we want is an ebb and flow to be smoothed out on this technology purchase. So my question is that I think that there needs to be a whole discussion, not necessarily on the useful life, not necessarily on whether or not we're purchasing more than what the enrollment is projecting, but whether or not there aren't other alternatives, even though they may be a little more expensive. But once we see what the real rollout plan and the consistency of what it is, so that these machines are purchased almost a similar amount in each of the next 5 years, so that there's rolling stock, that doesn't make sense for this next budget year and maybe the year after to be leasing certain machines, so that we can reduce every 5-year hit.
Like a sudden bump up every 5 years.
We have rolling procurement.
Right.
Right.
So I like some thought process on, since you just heard my long-winded explanation of where I wanted to get to, but I think something along those lines, not so specific as to, hey, we're challenging your numbers, but it's really a full understanding of, we really would like to see a rolling procurement that's perfect terms for that. And we think that there should be other options viewed instead of purchasing 5 years, which only means in 5 years from now or 4 years from now, we're going to have to replace the same thing again.
I'm okay with Jack's premise, but I don't think it's our responsibility to tell him how it's done. You can do that by capitalizing any investment and just amortizing over the 5 years. You can lease it, as Jack said, or you buy something new every year for 5 years when the next thing comes due.
Well, there's more than
we
be doing
let
that.
them do what they want.
Well,
our communication would be, guys, that should be managed in a way that it smooths out.
Right, and maybe that's as simple as what it is. And then when we're having our budgetary conversations, we can have that, and come up with some suggestions. But that's where I really wanted to be, because I'm more concerned of the 5-year hit than I am on whether or not they counted 10 machines too much or 20.
But I think it also makes you a little bit more disciplined around what your real need is, as opposed to every 5 years say, hey, we bought it for the entire student body 5 years ago, so we're going to do that again. Because it feels like just during that Saturday marathon meeting, there are some people who felt, you know what, thanks for the iPad, but my son or daughter didn't use it to the end of the year. So I think that mindset needs to be tightened up in general with the technology.
Well, it's funny. A uncle through relationships recently passed away. Really super guy. Worked for many years for AT&T and then the Baby Bell afterwards. And part of what's being asked when it comes to the usage and other things like that was that a whole analysis on what the usage is on every individual so they can see. Now, other than the fact that that gets a little bit too spyware type thing for me, although I'm not somebody who puts a little thing across my camera. I figure if they want to look at my ugly body, they can. But the concept there is, he told me a story about that at AT&T around Father's Day and Christmas, they had a lot of tools disappear from their inventory list, and everybody lost their wrenches, lost their screwdrivers and everything else like that. So AT&T set up a really sophisticated internal control for controlling and making sure that you really needed these things. And about 3 years into the system, somebody did an evaluation to realize the internal control that they put in was costing 3 times the amount of the tools they were losing. And the system was scrapped. So sometimes the information that people want of this thing costs so much, and my question is, when you get this information, what are you going to do with it? is the cost savings on the fact that we're not purchasing certain iPads because 20% of the student base aren't using them or using their own devices. Is that worth the cost of the system to monitor what they want to monitor, even if we could? So I haven't heard that answer. That's my accounting and internal control, what are we getting for what you want, the information you want? I mean, we could probably get any information we want. The question is, what's the cost to it, to the school district? And once you get it, what is it really doing for us? So, I don't know the answers to that. The board will grapple with that.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's my comment on some of the usage and bring your own devices. So we'll take care of that. We have the student activity account that actually parent really asked for detail, but at the last meeting. But the next one down says we would particularly appreciate some more color on the student activity account. And it says,
one giant account, or are there several accounts, student activity accounts?
I believe there's a giant account for each of these schools. I am not sure, though, to give you that answer. Stacy?
Sorry,
is there one giant student activity account? Like, I know there's
For
a bunch
each
of
school?
Is it per school? Is it per RC?
No idea.
Okay.
So, instead of the word as concerns athletics, as it relates to, is the wording that I would put in there. The last comment, I don't mind the oft-repeated sentiment, things that get measured get managed. It's one of my favorite things in accounting, and actually analysis and metrics and everything else like that. We need to make that a little bit more friendly as opposed to saying, but it gets back to what I said. Okay, so you've asked for 5 trend analyses. Okay, so now we got the trend analysis. My next question is typically from a managerial perspective, so what? So that's sort of saying, like that you're asking for trends, like that you're asking, but what's your conclusion, and do your conclusions end up affecting a program? And if it's affecting the program, does it affect the budget? Or are you just asking for trend analysis? Because, it's the new buzzword. So.
Excuse me, Jack. At our last meeting, we talked about, somewhere during the discussion about student activity account and transparency, I think we spiraled into transportation, and the question was asked, and I think we may have answered it, but the question was asked, what portion of that $3.some-odd million budget for transportation was to and from school versus other activities, and some transparency on that. And then we talked about that a lot of the activities, perhaps all the activities, student activities, are paid, the transportation and the activities themselves are paid for by the parent.
With the exception of 2.
Okay.
Not athletic, not all. Elementary field trips are busing is paid for by the PTOs,
except for one 2nd grade field trip and one 3rd grade field trip.
Because they're taking 3, and the PTOs pay for 2.
Yeah.
So
because we pay for 2 field trips per grade. PTOs, sorry. PTOs pay for 2 field trips per grade. 2nd grade and whatever was third, they get an extra. So that 3rd one, the PTOs don't pick up.
Like Darien.
It's picked up by the Board of Ed.
And then the rest is sort of a mishmash. I think there's some here and there that parents pay for. There's some in
even in athletics, there are some that parents pay for, and then there are some that. But most of them, I think, are paid. They're in the athletic budget.
If I might recall, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, Um,
Well, they pay, in athletics, they
But-
pay for, if they want a nicer bus, right? That's
yeah,
what it is.
well,
That's actually, good. You just reminded me, there's a couple of trips at the middle school where they go for 1 or 2 nights up to camps and stuff, where I've seen the
Yeah.
big fancy.
Oh, parents
not
pay.
fancy.
Parents,
Yeah,
right,
those are
pay
the
for
ones,
that.
those
Parents
are
pay
the
for
big
those.
ticket ones.
Oh, yeah, they're like hundreds
Going to
of
Pear Tree
dollars.
Point is probably not.
That's not.
but like I recall,
That's probably what I was thinking of.
I do recall, and it matters what it is.
Yeah.
So like, and again, I can only talk about the sports that I'm familiar with. But I know that, which helps the rankings and other things like that, that in lacrosse there was a field trip that was going out to play in tournaments and other things like that outside of the normal things, and we were playing some
Like
top.
non-FCAC.
Well, yeah, well, you forget the FCI. But it wasn't a local team, I mean, other than Ridgefield and New Canaan, Greenwich. It was not a local such as that we're playing Garden City or Massapequa or other things like that, or St. Anthony's, which are all local area. But it was actually a field trip that we were either going to Pennsylvania or going to Maryland. And so there was approval by the board to take that trip, but that trip were paid for by the parents of the students that were the team that was going to be the athletes. So,
So I guess, Jack, are you asking whether or not we should take out that final
no, I don't want to take it out, I just want to reword it.
reward?
You're on the last bullet?
Yeah. So, any thoughts on that, or? I mean, when we were originally putting down that saying it was a mere piece of paper, that's just to get the point across, but I don't want to be.
You just drop those words.
Yeah, why don't you just
drop
start with
that one.
we?
Yeah.
We look forward to.
Yeah, that being said, we look forward to, just get rid
Okay.
of that.
Yeah, that works.
Merely a sheet of paper is sort of the.
That's good.
Thanks.
Thanks for all your work, but we really don't value it. Good job. Good color. Good fonts.
That's basically what
You'd be a good associate in investment banking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I recall that I one time described recently, that if one of my associates, when we were doing products, gave me that product, I would call it a blooming train wreck. On the last paragraph, we had already mentioned on the third line from the bottom, and it says that the need for flexibility to absorb other things. The committee asked the board administration to look closely at opportunities to reduce the budget. Take out including the review of the initial budget.
I'll just take out that next clause.
Because that's.
We talked about that above.
So yeah, we talked about it above, and based upon the Board of Finance memo, I don't want to get involved in that at this point. So, are we all in favor as for the document as amended?
Yes.
Can I have a motion to approve the document as amended? Peter? Lisa is second. All in favor? And I'd like to thank all of those who participated on this, by Varys and Beth for coordinating all of this while her basement was flooded.
And for the record, I want to thank Beth because I've been otherwise engaged, and she's done 99 and 44 100% of work on this document, so I'm grateful for her in this situation.
Can I ask a question about the 2020 capital projects? Have we gotten any of those sheets on any of those yet?
No. Well, first, they haven't been approved by the Board of Ed, and
But I would think the Board of Ed would want to see that.
Exactly.
I will tell you.
What are they using?
I will tell you, contrary to, and this is different sometimes how the two boards work, and Kate will shoot me again if I'm misstating something. But I believe that when we get the Board of Selectmen budget, if it's consistent from last year, I believe the sheets were already in the binder. So, this is new administration, but I've already mentioned this to Tara, and I will continue to mention it on what's that we need these. Period. I'm being nice by saying we strongly recommend, but if I recall, the position of this committee has been if we don't get them, we'll start cutting some capital until we get them. So, we'll play nice.
I was mostly questioning the $500,000 for the tennis courts. I'd just like to see more detail.
I think there is some memorandums that have been discussed, but yes, absolutely. And I can't give you more information on that.
But that's even more than the HVAC program.
So Lisa and I will play a round of tennis and make an evaluation of that.
$525,000, I could probably build it myself.
Well, they did them, the post-tension concrete at Wheat Beach, and it really is good. I mean, they used to repair them, and they cracked the next year all the time. And since they've done that, and I can't remember how many years, at least 5, probably longer.
Yeah.
They're flawless.
Really? You don't know what these are?
Oh, I didn't think
No,
it would make much of a difference.
I don't
Well,
know
then
the
what
condition
future
of
maintenance
these,
savings would be, right?
I do believe, and I may be totally wrong, but I think they were talking about that they were using the contractor that had done the town's.
Yeah, they mentioned post-tension
Yeah,
concrete, I think it's
I
called.
think they're gonna use the same, I mean, they have to put it out for bid, mind you, but I think they're looking to use the same thing that was done in the town from that. All right, let's go to the Board of Selectmen budget. I actually had a call today saying you're discussing the Board of Selectmen budget in your committee, but we haven't presented it. So I had to say, yes, we're not discussing your budget, we're discussing a process on how to approach your budget. So, well, at least we're being listened to and watched.
I thought you had a magic ball that told the future.
Yeah. I just want to go over the time frame so that everybody has it. I sent this out, but if anybody is similar to me, it actually took me about 15 minutes to find the email at where I sent it out so I can print it out again. So I will resend it. On the 27th, there will be a board presentation at 7 o'clock. That is also the same night of the RTM meeting, but Kate is usually done much quicker than an hour. On Tuesday at 5:30, there is the Board of Selectmen, Town Administrator, RTM.
Which Tuesday, Jack?
The 28th.
28th.
Board of Selectmen, RTM, Finance Department, Treasurer, Board of Finance, Assessor, Tax Collector, Legal Counsel, Human Resources, Probate, IT, Register of Voters, Town Clerk, which is actually a little bit bigger than most of the other ones here, Beautification, Celebrations, Planning, Harbor Master, which I'm actually surprised we're still listening to. Only not that they're not important, but it's a small budget. So they're going to be covering these budgets. I don't know whether or not the harbor master himself will be there, and that's part of what they're doing to move these things along. But that does start at 5:30. On Wednesday, the next day at 5:30 on the 29th, there's some little bit more heavy lifting. Bless you. We have Park and Rec, Police, Library, Employee Benefits, Risk Management, and the Public Works.
Also at 5:30.
Also at 5:30. But those are the larger parts of the budget, to go there. on that, and
What was that date, Jack? I'm sorry.
the 29th.
Thank you.
And, you know, part of it is also for the employees. We do have quite a lot of employees that travel great distances, and so keeping them around for a long period of time doesn't necessarily bode well, and, you know, allows them to go home at a reasonable time. On Monday, February 3rd.
What happened to Thursday the 30th? Isn't there an F&B meeting?
Maybe. It's probably to discuss what we just heard in the prior 3 days. I try and slip those things in.
Yeah.
On Monday, well, because you don't want to deal with it all at once, I will say Jamie has always been very good that we'll be able to ask questions there. I know some people like watching them on tape. The difficulty is you then can't ask your question. So, although one year I think I text Dave Martin to ask my question because I was watching it on tape. On Monday we have Fire Marshal, Disaster Preparedness, the 3 fire companies, Fire Commission, and EMS. Again, these are people that do work and then they're coming in, so having them play their work.
On the 3rd, February 3rd?
February 3rd at 7
What time does
p.m.
that start?
7.
7.
You're sending all this out, right?
I am sending it out. I just want to go through it quickly. On the 4th, there's capital and budget deliberations, same on the 5th. Both of them are at 7. And then on Tuesday, the 11th, the special board meeting with the final vote. So I will be sending this out, but this is part of what we've been talking about. You know, like, I know that Stacy likes the police, but we should be...
I like everyone.
You appreciate the police?
She's worked on it in the past. So we want to try and develop expertise within the committee to not only follow what's going on budget, but there's going to be a Board of Finance member assigned to various groups. I'm going to go to the old groupings that John Zagroski did. And so this is to have members of F&B meet with the Board of Finance folks to discuss how we view certain things. And therefore allows an exchange of an idea of what's going on, where concerns are from both parties, so nobody is surprised at the outcome, all right? And, you know, sometimes it's good in discussions and everything. There was, you know, revenue's going to be one of it, bonding is going to be added to this from the Board of Finance side, but it's not within this budget, so, but some of this is there. I'm going to be asking people to please sign up for what area you want. I'd also like the same people to be following what goes on in quarterly meetings. When they're getting the reports, we can get copies of that, and just so that we're following what's going on during the course of the year. There's a couple of funds. Terry used to handle the parking fund, which has some sophistication to it. And actually, Kip Coons actually wrote the Bible on what it is, and it's a very good write-up. But we need people to understand, because there's various lots, what we can invest in, and things like that, so we're following that. There is the Sewer Authority that has its own fund, where Frank Adelman, I believe, is the individual from Public Works that does it. So we need our own Ed Norton to be participating in the Sewer Authority. So that some people are just too young.
Yes, too young.
I got it.
So that, you know, we have that expertise. They do get interest credit from what goes on based upon the investments in that. So I'll be sending that out. please pick what you want to do. And we're going to have more than one person on it, but it does allow us to have interesting conversations on what's going on, express your thoughts, and then come back and report. So throughout the course of the year, if there's something that you're hearing in a particular area, we'll set aside part of the meeting to have that conversation. The other thing, and this is a matter of how we look at things. I've always netted the Board of Selectmen budget, and we're going to present it the same way, but in the budget, the revenues are always, after we figure out everything that we have to spend, we take away the revenues, and the rest is a net amount that has to be raised through taxes, which, putting it over the denominator being the grand list, tells us what the mill rate is. Again, I think that because what's requested is more important on a year-to-year basis than what the end result is in the mill rate, because there's various ways that we pay for it throughout the year. That being said, I think that it's important that we have our input into what's going on throughout the year so that we know what's there, and we can have our conversations with the Board of Finance very early on. One of the things, as we were talking about, was one of the things that F&B has changed over the last 4 years, over prior F&Bs, is that our job is to get all of our work done before the Board of Finance votes, as opposed, the horse has already left the cart. But one of the things that I do when I do a comparison is I net the Board of Selectmen budget with revenues, even though they don't necessarily control the revenues. They may control a fee of what they're going to charge, but how many people buy dump stickers, or how many people sell their houses or get married so that they have licenses? There's no control from the various departments of what really the volume that's going to go through there. Or, as in the case which happened last year again, when they're trying to quantify what the building revenue is from the developments, they're hearing something in September where shovels were supposed to be in ground in April, and the first shovel just recently went into ground, which meant that certain revenues were the best information that's available. So some of those are educated estimates, but they're not necessarily the same way that the Board of Ed has some unknowns to it. The reality is we should be looking at the two things separately, even though they'll discuss what the revenue is. But the Board of Selectmen's budget, really, I'm familiar only one time during the years that I've done this where the Board of Selectmen has requested, that I recall actually, where the Board of Selectmen has asked for an increase in their appropriation. And that happened to be with Superstorm Sandy, where, if you recall, they requested certain funds to be there based upon timing, even though the funds had already been set up in a separate reserve and were accounted for in the proper way. But that's the only time that I recall them actually coming in and saying, after all these appropriations, where it is. So, I just want to get that out when I'm talking about things. I still look at it net. I will always look at it net. I was told I shouldn't look at it net. I still look at it to a certain extent net. That's my accounting background. But I do understand what the Board of Selectmen control, and some of those numbers on the revenue side, which are really controlled by the Board of Finance. So, with that, we have 2-minute meetings. Do I have a motion?
Were they distributed
Yeah,
by the town clerk?
No.
No.
Guess we can't vote on it. I mean, we could vote on them and, just trust that.
Just for the record.
One was in December.
December 16th and
I think
January.
that one.
Let's see.
Well, if we're not aware whether they went around or not, it's not good form to vote on.
Kind of sort of remember, I mean.
How about next time?
I'll get them out.
We could do them on the 30th.
Yeah, just because they're there and I like to keep them up to date.
January 30th.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn? Is there anything else anybody, well, can't do it special meeting. That's good.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.